Prabhupada, his presence was so powerful that when you came in his presence, you didn't feel like you were part of the material world. You felt that you were in some kind of a spiritual, transcendental environment. I didn't know about Vrindavan then, but now we'd say that Prabhupada actually was bringing Vrindavan with him. And so you felt the mood of Vrindavan whenever you came in the presence of Prabhupada. He was actually carrying Krishna in his heart. So I didn't understand that, but I felt that. Just being with Srila Prabhupada, I could feel the change. I could see that here was a genuine spiritual master that was actually practicing what he was preaching or practicing what he was teaching. The other people that I visited, they had books and they had teachings, but then they didn't practice those things where Prabhupada was. So all these things helped to build up my faith, but then Prabhupada was very merciful and he immediately engaged me in service. He had me be an assistant to, at that time his secretary was Govinda Dasi, I think Gorsundar. I forget, I think it was Gorsundar, I'm not sure, I can't remember, I think. And so when they would go shopping, when Prabhupada took the afternoon nap, and they would have me like, they call it babysit or guru sit. I had to sit outside just in case Prabhupada woke up and wanted something, then I would be on call. And usually he didn't want anything. But I would be there while they were out just at that time. So sometimes Prabhupada would wake up and he'd call me in, and then he would ask me different things. He said he wanted to get a flower. This was he said that if I get a flower every day, this will improve this will increase my longevity. So he asked me, can you bring me a flower? A rose, especially a rose, not just a flower, I wanted a rose. And then I was very excited, here the spiritual master was asking me to bring him a rose every day. So I said yes. So I went back to the temple and then told the temple president I was going to get a rose for Srila Prabhupada. And the president said, what are you doing? You're in Maya. You can't do that. I said, why? Prabhupada told me to get him a rose. And I had phoned up, he heard me phone up a florist and order, I was going to go and pick up a rose. And he got really angry that, I shouldn't do that. But I thought he was like imposing himself, that I'll do everything else you say, but this one thing, Prabhupada asked me to bring him a rose. I want to bring him the rose. And he got very angry and said I couldn't do that, I should do something else. So I became a little angry because he was yelling at me, and it was, so anyway, I kind of just left the temple with the vibrations ringing in my ear, and I was walking off, and I got to like a dead end where the road, it didn't go any further, and nearby I saw there was a florist shop, and that whole time I would just, I wasn't able to think. So I walked in the florist shop, I thought, well, I'll get a rose, and the person said, oh, here, I've been waiting for you, here's the rose. Turned out it was the exact shop that I'd called, but I'd forgotten the address and everything. So then I went back and I saw Prabhupada and bowed down, and I offered him the rose, and he took it. So thank you very much. I remember one time he was giving a lecture, and he was the whole lecture saying how we had to be 10% Krishna conscious. We had to be completely surrendered to Krishna, 100%. And he was just ramming that point home. And at the end of the class, the devotees were kind of, very serious and looking down, as if he could read their minds. That 100%, who could come up to that standard? So then he looked at them, and now he kind of relaxed his mood a little bit, and he said, well, if you can be 90% Krishna conscious, then you can also go back to Godhead. And then he started to slightly turn to prepare. There was a very big Vyasasana, and he was very high up. It was maybe 4 feet in the air. It was so he had to go down steps to get down the Vyasasana. So he was just starting to turn, and then he said, even 80%. Even if you're 80% surrendered, Krishna will still take you. So then he turned and he got down the Vyasasan and he was walking away, and his chadar, his robe, the chadar was flowing with one hand, and then it was dragging on the ground, and he just kind of stopped at the devotees, looked at the devotees, and then he said, even if you're 70% Krishna conscious, still Krishna will take you in it. He threw the chadar over his shoulder and walked off with his head very high in the air. One devotee had told me that one thing you should do is you should always try to ask questions of Prabhupada, but you should think a little bit, and every time he gives a class, ask a good question. So, since I had that advice, I every time at the end of a class, I'd always ask a question, trying to think of something that was in the class. And then sometimes Prabhupada would... I remember one time I asked a question about Radharani something and said, who are you to ask about Radharani? Or then sometime I would ask, every day I would ask questions. And so it would be a regular, I would ask questions and then Prabhupada would respond. And he would respond every day in a different way. So then we had to work, we had to go outside and work to maintain the Montreal temple. There was no source of income. So I would miss the evening class, and I would be able to just come to the morning class. But the next day I'd listen to the tape. So the one time I was listening to the tape, and at the end of class, Prabhupada said, anyone has any questions? And nobody had any questions. And he said, Jayapataka, or Jay or whatever, I forget, anyway, whether I was initiated or not, I don't remember. He said, he asked nice questions. So that was like a big thing for me. Otherwise, Prabhupada didn't praise disciples normally to their face. He would always be very grave with the disciples, but sometimes you'd hear that he would comment to other devotees, and you'd hear it through the grapevine. So this time I heard it on the tape. Someone told me you should listen to the tape. I remember I was on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada, and he just stopped by the side of a church. He looked at it and he said that in the future our ISKCON temples are going to be something like the churches. That there'll be some devotees in the temple, but there'll be many devotees who live around the temple, and they'll be coming on the weekends or the festivals. And at that time, there was only maybe a dozen, or I don't know, maybe 1970. I don't know exactly how many temples there were, but there weren't that many temples, and the whole mood was making temples and joining the temple, being a temple devotee. But here Prabhupada was saying that in the future, the temples would be more like a center, and there'd be big communities around the temple of people worshiping Krishna in their home. So that I always remembered that, because of course now I have to do I'm doing a lot of coordination of congregational program. So that instruction really has a lot of importance to me now. But at that time, I didn't really know what to think of it. It was just like a prediction or something. I remember many things that happened when Prabhupada was in Montreal. Like we'd walk to McGill University or walk around the block, and Prabhupada would stop and make observations. One time he was saying that if you see a very healthy person, someone who's like very big, then you can ask him, where does he do his grocery shopping? Because obviously he must have a good source because he's healthy. And just so happened that a taxi drove up and let somebody out, and the taxi driver came out and he was very big. Then Prabhupada said, yes, go ask him, where does he do his shopping? Prabhupada was just very spontaneous like that. And then so the devotee went over and asked him where he did his shopping, and the taxi driver, of course, kind of bewildered why someone was asking where he bought his groceries. So one day they said that in Montreal they found there was a cockroach in the quarters. So then Prabhupada took the cockroach up in his hand and opened the window, and then he told the cockroach, here, I'm giving you the whole world, now you can enjoy it. And he threw the cockroach out of the window and closed it. So then somehow we got one doctor had just built a brand new house which he was going to make into a clinic, and no one had moved in it yet. So he thought that, okay, I'll give it to you for 6 months. It'll be auspicious. Some sadhus will come and stay in my new clinic, my new house. So then we had a place to invite Prabhupada. So in the meantime, Prabhupada had left America and gone to Japan. So we sent him the message that now we had a place for him separate. So then Prabhupada said, okay, I'm coming. And we made a big reception in the airport in Calcutta. We had the newspapers, we had all the media was there. It was a big event. In fact, a whole truckload of Gaudiya Vaishnava devotees came for a chanting kirtan to receive Prabhupada. Then we were asked to go and invite everyone. Before Prabhupada came, we went around and invited all of his godbrothers who would like to come to receive him, because here he was like a conquering Gaudiya Vaishnava missionary who had spread Krishna consciousness in places where no one had ever even ventured to go before, and was coming back successfully. And one godbrother, Puri Maharaj, he said, oh yes, I would like to go. But when he said that, I didn't really know much about the internal workings or the politics or whatever that was going on between the different Gaudiya Mat people. But one Grihastha devotee came up to him and said, no Maharaj, how can you go? You are an older godbrother to him. You took initiation before he did. You took sannyas before he did. So you cannot go to him. He should come to meet you. I said, it's kind of strange. I mean, what does it matter if you were initiated a few days earlier or later? Someone had done such a wonderful preaching. So in the end, none of Prabhupada's godbrothers actually came to the airport to meet him, but some disciples of his godbrothers came to meet him. So Prabhupada noted that he was not very happy that none of his godbrothers came to meet him. And then one of the godbrothers' disciple invited that your godbrother's waiting for you at his temple. He has a feast for you there. So he wants you to go from the airport to his temple. And then Prabhupada, he became very grave. And then he said, let us go in the car. Of course, before that we had a big reception, a press conference and everything, and there was an arti in the VIP lounge. He didn't have to go through any customs, immigration. He went straight to the VIP lounge. And then when he came out, we had a big, it was a Cadillac actually. Somehow one life member had a Chevrolet or Cadillac, a very big car for India, American car. And so then Prabhupada went in that. And then they invited that you come to the temple of his godbrother. When he went in the car, and then he said, take me to your house. I will not go to that temple. You can go later and bring the prasadam that they've made and bring it to the house. You go straight to our house. We were invited to some Bhagavad Gita conference. It was sponsored by one of the disciples of Gandhiji, Vinoda Bhave, in a place called Wardha in Maharashtra. And he's very famous. Vinoda Bhave was like one of the most famous saints in the Gandhi tradition, and all big political leaders would go to meet him. And he was trying to protect the cows from being slaughtered. That was like one of his last campaigns. But somehow he was having a big conference on the Bhagavad Gita, and he invited Prabhupada to come. And he invited many other sadhus to come. So I was there for that conference. And they were all sitting in a very raised seat, and Vinoda Bhave had many women disciples who would chant whole chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. And then Prabhupada, he had international devotees, men and women. And there were other Mayavadis who had their disciples. So Prabhupada, Vinoda Bhave had his disciples sing the Bhagavad Gita, and he spoke something. Then Prabhupada had us chant Hare Krishna. We were all chanting a big kirtan. Everybody was rocking and clapping their hands, and they were getting into the kirtan. Then Prabhupada delivered a very nice lecture. Then afterwards, there was one Mayavadi sannyasi. And it seemed like he was upset that Prabhupada's kirtan and everything was having a big effect on the whole crowd. So then, normally he would just give a Bhagavad Gita class, but now he wanted to do a kirtan also. So then he told the people, you should all chant with me, we'll do a kirtan. And it seemed like he was just speculating some mantra right on the spot. Maybe he chanted before, I don't know. But it was a very unusual mantra, something like Sat Chit Ananda Vasudeva Sat Chit Ananda Govindam some Om Tat Sat. And then, it was just like really strange, and nobody was really getting inspired by the mantra, but he was trying to chant it. In the middle of Prabhupada, he just said to the devotees, chant Hare Krishna again. So then right in the middle of his, Mayavadi kirtan, the devotees just jumped up and with kirtan, kartals and madranga drums, they just started chanting, and everybody was kind of relieved because that was the most strange chant they'd ever heard before, in their life. So then they all started chanting with Prabhupada. I was there also when some devotees, we went with Srila Prabhupada when he was seeing Indira Gandhi, and he had a list of things he was going to discuss with Indira Gandhi. But then Indira Gandhi said that she was very upset because the president of Bangladesh, who was the founding president, Mujibur Rahman, he had just been assassinated in a coup. So she was very upset. But she made time for Prabhupada to see her, but first time she gave was a Thursday afternoon. So Prabhupada, he didn't really consult much with astrologers or anything, but he followed that don't have a really important meeting on a Thursday afternoon. Consider that it was not an auspicious time. That was about the only astrological thing he really observed. So he said, if I have to meet her at that time, then I don't want to meet her because I'd meet her in the morning or in the evening, but not in the afternoon. So they changed the time to a time that he approved of. So then we all went together, and we got just to the door where Indira Gandhi came and met him, and then he went in alone and talked with her. So later we came back, and so she was very respectful to him. And she asked him actually, well, how do you know that your followers, they're not CIA agents? And then he had to explain that, I went to the West, I preached, these people have sacrificed everything, they gave up so many bad habits, they're getting up at 4 in the morning and attending Mangal Aartis, and if they were CIA, they'd go live in 5-star hotels and they would have a whole different lifestyle. They wouldn't be vegetarians, give up all these habits. So then she was convinced, and then she said, all right, so I'll give so many of your devotees, I'll give them long-term visa. Because there was a problem then, they weren't giving us visas. So then in India after that, she passed some order, and we all got, those who needed visas, they all got visas. One very nice thing which happened, one day we were in Mayapur, we were walking through the fields, and then Prabhupada would always have us, he'd ask me to sometime lead the way through the fields because they're just these little narrow paths between the rice paddies. And so then he said, these are like the little highways in the fields. So then he said he wanted to go to the Ganges, and he went down to the Ganges. At that time it was in the winter, and so the river was very low, and the water had become very clear. Normally the Ganges is like a little saffron color, slightly muddy with a reddish hue. But now the flow had reduced so much that you could see the bottom. It was clear. It was very rare to see the Ganges like that. So then Prabhupada said, let's take a bath. And then the secretary said, well, Prabhupada, we don't have any gamchas or towels or anything. We just came for a walk. Then Prabhupada looked around and said, well, there's no women here. We can just go in our kopins. And then I have a top piece, I can wear this. So then he took off the top piece and put it on. And all the devotees, brahmacharis and sannyasis, just went into the Ganges. And then Prabhupada, he did something I never saw anyone do before. It's like when he was dipping under, he closed all the holes in his head. He put, I won't be able to speak when I do this, so I just give a demonstration, but he put 2 fingers over the mouth, 2 over the nostrils, 2 over the eyes, and the thumbs in the ears, like this. He took 3 dips, then he came out. And then one devotee got a little excited, wanted to put water on Prabhupada's back or something, but then he kind of looked, and then it was getting like too familiar. But it was very, I don't know what to say, it was very ecstatic to just suddenly have that kind of a spontaneous bath with Srila Prabhupada. Well, sometimes he'd be sitting in his room in Calcutta, and then I remember one time he was explaining, one of the life members said, well, can you show us a miracle? And Prabhupada said, well, some yogis, they show a miracle of, they give some rasgulla or sweet or something. Said, I went to America with $40, with 40 rupees rather, and now we have temples all over the world in this short span which are worth more than 400 million rupees. So isn't that a miracle? And they thought for a minute, and the businessmen were calculating, said, that's a miracle. We were walking on near the Jalangi River one day, and Prabhupada, one villager, he came with a big basket of vegetables on his head. So then Srila Prabhupada asked, so you're going to sell those in the market? He said, yes. Well, how much will you sell? You sell us the whole basket. And he had just been telling the devotees how I liked fresh vegetables from the garden, and we should offer our vegetables to the deity. And if you buy wholesale, how you can save money. And here a man came with a basket on his head. So then Prabhupada immediately set up a bargaining with him. And he started telling, look at, if you go to the market, you'll spend the whole day sitting there with a basket. I'm buying it from you right now. You can go and do something else. You don't have to walk 2 miles to the market and sell your goods. So like this, he bargained him down to maybe 6 rupees for the basket. And then said, okay, you go to the temple, and here's a chit. Give him a note, and they'll pay you over there. So the man went off with a basket and went to the temple and sold those vegetables, and then that was what they cooked for the deities and Prabhupada that day. One time, I remember one Maharaj was cooking up hot puris, and we were taking hot puris with date gur, with date molasses. And then Prabhupada was looking through the window and seeing everybody, the sannyasis and brahmacharis around getting hot puris, and then taking one after another with the date gur. Then he said, this is not very good for sannyasi life. One time, one of the big ministers, he was the number 2 person in the state government. He was the home minister. And he came to see Srila Prabhupada, and his family, his name is Tarunkanti Ghosh. His family is family of Vaishnavas. His grandfather was the one who said that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was the 7th Goswami. He had written a book about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So now his grandson had become a big politician. He was the editor of a major newspaper also. So he came to see Prabhupada, and when he came, he went right behind Prabhupada's desk, and he went to grab Srila Prabhupada's feet. So at that time, Brahmananda was going to come, and then looked like he was going to go and jump on him. And then Prabhupada, here the home minister is the person who's in charge of all the police, all the everything. He said, no, it's all right. And he just came and grabbed Prabhupada's feet and just put his head on his feet. Like Prabhupada, what could he do? One time, he was very strong with me, and he was like chastising me or giving me some strong instruction. And the next time I came to see him, then he had changed his mood, and he said, I'm sorry that maybe I dealt with you too harshly, he said, how did he say it? He said, I'm a very hard person to tolerate, I deal very harshly or something. And I couldn't believe that Prabhupada was saying, such a thing to me. And then I said, no, Srila Prabhupada, I was offensive, and there was no wrong on your part. There was one very interesting thing happened, that when we moved to the new building in Mayapur, where he was staying in the 3rd floor, but the building was not finished. The toilets were not completed, the piping hadn't been connected. So we had to personally empty the toilet. There would be a bucket there. And the toilet was there, but there was just no pipe. And he came all of a sudden and we wasn't ready. So we had the service to go, and who could empty out the remnants or whatever, the refuse. But one day, Prabhupada started calling out, Jayapataka, Jayapataka. And why he was calling out, so I ran to the bathroom. And in the bathroom, Prabhupada was holding the door semi-shut, and there was a snake, a venomous serpent, was stuck in the border of the door, and it was trying to bite Srila Prabhupada, and it was leaping out and just coming and missing him. And he was holding the door, so by the pressure of the door, he was like, the snake was being slightly crushed, so that he couldn't get loose. So like Prabhupada was like this and holding over here, and the snake was half, this much it was out of the door, and he was trying to get Prabhupada. And so he was like, he had called for me, and then, I saw this situation. So then somehow I got Prabhupada out of there, and with a stick or something, we hit the snake down, and we got Prabhupada out. And then this is a very unusual circumstance, and all of a sudden. But afterwards, like Prabhupada, it was. He never lost. He was just, it was an urgent situation, so he was calling, but it was never that. He was always under the circumstance, cool and calm, and never lost his. Then he was trying to find out where the others live. So if there's one, there must be two, because they always go in pairs. We could never. The other one disappeared down the hall, and we could never find it. Actually, Prabhupada was walking down the stairway in Calcutta, and there are many devotees. I think like Tamal Krishna and so many different devotees were there. And Prabhupada was going down the step, and his step slipped a little bit. It looked like he was almost going to fall down the stairway. And one of the senior devotees said, "Watch out, Srila Prabhupada." And then Prabhupada just stopped and looked, and he said that it is your responsibility to watch out. You have to take care of the body of the spiritual master. And the spiritual master will look out for your spiritual well-being. But as far as whether I fall or not, that you have to guard against. We were walking in a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada in North Calcutta. And then Srila Prabhupada just said, "Oh, here's a life member." He was a very wealthy man. For some reason, Prabhupada wanted to just stop in at his house, so he walked in. And the servant came out and he said, "Tell your master that Bhaktivedanta Swami is here." So then after some time the servant came out and said, "Babu puja korta hai," that the master is doing puja. He's doing worship of his deity. He'll be here after some time. So then Prabhupada just commented that Krishna is more pleased when the devotee is served than when he's served. And that if this person was a more advanced devotee, he would appreciate it that here a spiritual master has come and left his deity worship to receive the devotee of Krishna. But because he's thinking that his deity worship is more important than receiving the devotee of Krishna. This shows that he's a neophyte or a Kanishtadikari. There was one time a thief who was a con artist who dressed like a sannyasi, and he started collecting in the name of ISKCON. He gave himself the name of Chutananda. So he was known amongst devotees as a Chutananda number 2. And he was based in Rajasthan. And around Jaipur he was collecting money. Somehow he got receipts. He copied receipts, rubber stamps, everything you needed to collect money. He even made up a big plan for building a temple. And he was going around and getting donations from people, saying he's a Chutananda, and it's for ISKCON. So some of these people appeared in Bombay, and said, we were made a member by a Chutananda. Were you a life member? With Chutananda in Jaipur. Chutananda at that time was in Hyderabad or South India somewhere. So then they sent a few devotees up to find out who is this Chutananda, and then they located that he was actually a thief. And he was stealing from people in this way, as a con artist. So somehow they got him to go to see Prabhupada, who was in Mayapur. And Prabhupada had called all the like the equivalent of the FBI in India, the CID, the chief of the district police, superintendent of police, and they all came. In the meantime, Prabhupada talked with this person. There's a Chutananda number 2. And he, after talking to Prabhupada, he said that you're a great spiritual master, a saint. I feel changed after talking with you. So I want to surrender at your lotus feet. I'm going to surrender my life to you and do whatever you say. I'm giving up all my bad ways. So then Prabhupada called in all the big police officers that came there to take this person away, because there had already been cases registered and everything. And he said that I have to give this person asylum, because he surrendered to me. As a spiritual master, if someone surrenders to me, I have to give him shelter. And they were, you know how police are, they're like ready to just dive in on him and, take him away. And they were like, he said, well, Guruji, what can we say? But we don't believe this person. He's a thief, So what can I do? If he surrenders, then I have to accept. But he told that person, if you follow, you're safe. But if we find that you want to escape and leave, I'm going to turn you over to the police. So he gave that person some service to do. He had him do some writing for him and kept him engaged. But after about, a week or 10 days, some devotee spotted him in the Mangalarti time trying to leave from the front gate with his bag. So then he went and grabbed him and brought him over to Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada said, I gave you a chance. You said you were surrendering, but now you're revealing that you are not actually sincere. So then he called the police and said, okay, now I'm giving him over to you. One day, when we just moved into the Lotus building, the first multi-story temple, guest house, where Prabhupada's quarters were, when we moved from the grass hut to that building, then there was a very big feast. And we invited many villagers and everyone to come. We gave a big feast. After the feast was over, all the leaf plates were thrown behind the temple. And then Prabhupada went upstairs to his room. And I was sitting in the room with Srila Prabhupada, and then there was dogs barking in the back. So Prabhupada got up and walked over to the veranda and looked over the veranda. And there he saw that there was this big pile. So many people had taken prasadam. There was a very big pile of banana leaves, which are the organic way that you eat in India, off a leaf. And there were some some children who were obviously very poor. They had, torn clothes, and they had sticks in their hand, and they were beating off the dogs to get the remnants of food that people had left on their plates and thrown in the garbage pile. And when Prabhupada saw that, how he he saw that, I mean, what a scene to see human beings have to fight dogs off to eat, the throwaways, the spittings that people have thrown away. When Prabhupada saw that, literally he started to cry. Tears were coming down. And he just said, just see how hungry they must be. I mean, who would, stoop to that kind of a situation to fight off dogs, to eat, things that other people had thrown away. So he was really moved that these children are so hungry. And he said, we have to organize that nobody within a 10-mile radius of the temple is hungry. Everyone should have food to eat. So that's when he organized this. Initially it started as the ISKCON Food Relief. Later it became Food for Life. And he wanted that there should be a regular program of distributing prasadam on a weekly basis, 2 days a week. And we started all 7 days in the week we were distributing. 5 days for little children and pregnant and nursing mothers, and 7 days was simply for anybody, without any discrimination, whether they're Hindu, Muslim, Christian, or anyone, men, women, young, old. So that, and Prabhupada was so moved when he saw that people were hungry like that. But one time at a disappearance festival of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada was explaining how the disciple tries to carry out the order of his guru and the previous Param Guru, the grandfather guru and the previous acharyas. And then he gave us an example that how Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur had begged door to door to build the first temple at Mayapur Dham, and how the different acharyas had contributed to development of Mayapur Dham, how Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur had constructed the Joga Pit birthplace temple for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and developed the Dham. And so Prabhupada said, and so to please my spiritual master and the previous acharyas, so I'm trying to do something also here in Mayapur Dham. And then he said, and I'm very grateful to everyone who is helping me. And then he couldn't speak any further, just like he choked up and he started crying. And there was a long silence. We didn't know what to do, and Prabhupada said, the secret of success is to please, to satisfy the desires of the previous acharyas. Well, Srila Prabhupada told us that Lalita Prasada Thakur, who was the brother of his spiritual master, Om Vishnupad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, became strained at a certain time. They parted ways. Otherwise, for a while they were together. So Srila Prabhupada made a courtesy call to see him. I had been sent to go there ahead of time to find out the situation with Bhakti Vinod Thakur's birthplace, because he was living in a place called Dwadasa Mandira at Birnagar. And this is called Dwadas Mandir because there's 12 like Shiva temples, all very little, small, beautiful little temples lined up in a row. And that means where you get the Dwadasa Mandir. And Bhakti Vinod Thakur spent a good section of his childhood there. There's a tree under which, mango tree under which he was seated. And it's a very beautiful place. And So we went to see, so I had initially talked with Lalita Prasada Thakur, and he was agreeable that ISKCON could do something. So then Prabhupada went there and discussed it with him. And it looked like they were going to give us, he had a big, I don't know exactly what the acreage is. Maybe it's like 25 acres of land, and maybe they would give us about half of it, where we could have a temple and do something for Bhaktivinoda Thakur's birthplace, which was on the side of a little pukur, a little water reservoir. And but the actual birthplace was a small little temple, which the door was broken off and it was in ill repair. And Prabhupada was practically crying when he saw that. So initially it seemed that things were working out. And then Prabhupada went a second time to kind of finalize everything. And Lalita Thakur, he's a very pure soul. He was like 97 years old at that time, if not 98. I think he lived to be 101, 102. And he would chant all the day. He'd just be chanting nonstop. There were deities upstairs on the second floor, and he had a library of all kinds of Bhaktivinoda Thakur books. And he had some disciples. It seemed one of his more intimate disciples was a very elderly lady, maybe in her 60s or 70s, who was called Bhaktima. And it was very impressive to see someone from a whole other era, like a century ago, you know. And he explained his own history that he was a lifelong brahmachari, never married. He was working for the government till he was maybe in his 50s. As I forget what was the employment, something more like a clerical, white-collar thing with the government. And then he retired. And so now he was, but even throughout his life, he was doing sadhana bhakti. So it was nice to know that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had more than one child that was active. And he actually had a lot of disciples. He was doing the Namhata preaching in Bangladesh and different parts of Bengal. But it was in a particular area. There was some disciple called Sachinanda, or Sachinanda, I think, who was actively preaching in the villages. This was kind of the backdrop. And then he was sitting in this little room on his bed, and he didn't move at this age. He didn't move much. Even he was bathed in his bed. I think he went to the bathroom in his bed, and they would brag that even though he would go to the toilet there, it smelled like roses, which is not the normal.
You experienced that?
I experienced that smell. There was no bad smell in the room. I can't say firsthand, you know. Yeah. But of course, with every person like that, they're surrounded by different people. And I think that his initial inclination was, as he had agreed with Prabhupada to do something jointly, but some of his followers had insisted that shouldn't give it. That's the impression I got. And the second time when Prabhupada went there, we were driving on the way to Calcutta and or Mayapur. It's about an hour drive from Mayapur. Then Prabhupada was given a seat, and he was discussing about developing the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. But this time there was a different mood. And it was indicated that they weren't agreeable now to giving a portion or to have an agreement with ISKCON. And it was obviously they didn't have the capacity. They do some village preaching. They were enthusiastic in his presence to do some things, but it wasn't. They didn't have the capacity or the wherewithal to actually develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So the Prabhupada became very impatient. He became very upset that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was so great that he deserves to have really such a wonderful facility, a wonderful monument for his greatness. And Prabhupada had talked about a library, a display, an exhibition, an ashram, a preaching facility, and fixed up his birthplace temple. But everything was being canceled with no reason given. Okay, if they could do it was one thing. So then Prabhupada, he suddenly became very intense in a very loud voice. He was saying, isn't it sinful? Isn't it sinful if somebody can develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but you're not allowing? Or was it the opposite? Isn't it sinful that you cannot do it? That somebody cannot develop, that if somebody cannot develop the birthplace of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and they won't let anyone else who could develop do it, then isn't that sinful? I think that was quite a few years now. Because it was, so the question was, they had it, but they couldn't do it. We could do it, but they didn't want to let us. So then nothing's going to happen. It's going to stay status quo. It's going to stay in an undeveloped state. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, still to this day, is worse run down than what it was then. And Prabhupada repeated this about 4 or 5 times, very loudly, almost, I wouldn't say shouting, but I would say just maybe one level below that. Very intensely, loudly declaring, asking us a question. And then nobody said anything. Then he walked out. As he went out, then he turned and there was a few of us, secretaries and assistants. Then he said, because I asked as a question, it was not an offense. I mean, he was kind. He was talking to someone, his brother, god brother, or something, of his own spiritual master. But he was put in a situation where Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his point of view, was being offended. And therefore, he thought he had a right, he said, he expressed he had a right to question it, and by questioning it, it wasn't an offense. If he had accused, like, you're a nonsense, you didn't get, whatever, something like that would have been offensive. But it's because he questioned, isn't it offensive? Isn't it offensive? Isn't it sinful? So that was an interesting understanding about how somebody can inquire, even if it's very intensively, but it's not technically an offense. Sometimes he would, I'd had the good fortune to ride with Srila Prabhupada from Calcutta, and sometimes I'd be here in Mayapur waiting for him to come. So on one occasion, there's a whole caravan of cars, and we're going out from Calcutta, and there's a little place, a little mango orchard. Used to be a big mango orchard, but what's left of it now is still there. A little piece was purchased by a devotee. And that was always Srila Prabhupada's favorite picnic spot. Every time he would stop there and have his breakfast, leave early in the morning, stop and have a breakfast picnic. So on the way driving out, there was an interesting pastime that Prabhupada had the Krishna and Balaram on the windshield of the car. And so he asked the devotees, well, who is more powerful, Krishna or Balaram? And then some said, well, Balaram, he's the more powerful, he's the older brother.
and then some were saying Krishna. And then Prabhupada said, well, see, Balaram has his hand on Krishna's shoulder, so Krishna's holding up Balaram. So he's more powerful. And then we got to the mango orchard. And this time, one of Prabhupada's godbrothers, Damodar Maharaj, he was coming with us. So then Prabhupada had some mats set up, and he had a little portable table, and he was taking prasadam with Damodar Maharaj. He said the others could take also. We were a little off the grass mat, kind of in a distance around. And then sometimes Prabhupada would have that type of let everybody take with them picnic. So it was a little picnic in the garden. And I just remember one little thing is that after taking the fruit, he had some fruit, he gave Damodar Maharaj some fruit. Then he asked that he can serve Damodar Maharaj water. But Damodar Maharaj said, no, but after fruit we shouldn't drink water. And then Prabhupada said, no, but what you can do, the secret is you take a sweet. You take a sweet, then after sweet you must take water. And it doesn't, because if you just take water after fruit, it washes all the nutrition of the fruit out. But if you take a sweet, he said, then that somehow caps it, and you can take water after that, and your fruit nutrition won't be washed away. So something to remember when you get thirsty after taking fruit. Just take a nice Mahaprasad Sandesh or Rasagula. Remember Srila Prabhupada and chant Hare Krishna.
And then drink water.
And then drink a little water, yeah. And then one time after the welcome address, he came upstairs and he sat down on his seat, and he was just like relaxing, leaning back. And he took on his golden goblet, drink a little water, drink the water high. And he just like sighed, like almost a sigh of relief, a sigh of satisfaction. He said, to be in Mayapur is so wonderful. If you live in Mayapur or if you die in Mayapur, it's all the same. So you were thinking, living or dying is the same. How is that, Srila Prabhupada? I said, well, Mayapur is the spiritual world. So if you're living in Mayapur, you're living in the spiritual world. And if you leave your body in Mayapur, if you die in Mayapur, you go back to the spiritual world. So both the same. Prabhupada was very expert at receiving guests. One time in Mayapur, he was teaching us that the Gaudiya Math, they're very expert at taking care of guests. But we are not so expert yet. So he said that you should take very nice care when a guest is there, feed them nice prasadam, give them personal attention, ask how they're doing, ask what they need. And then a big VIP came, a commissioner from the government. So Prabhupada said, I'm going to show you now. And then he sat there and he was saying, give him more water, give him more rice, give this. And the person was so flattered that the Acharya is personally overseeing my meal. And then sometimes Prabhupada would tell even almost like jokes. And then he said, we were kind of looking, like we never saw Prabhupada just like tell jokes. So he said, see, during prasad should be light talk. It's good for digestion. Like everything heavy, preaching heavy was somebody when they're trying to eat.
For us, Bombay was a very important place. The Prabhupada said that Mayapur was Vrindavan was his home, Bombay was his office, and Mayapur was his place of worship. So for us in Mayapur, Bombay was a very, very important place. It was one of the important places that the Prabhupada was related with. He mentioned that because Bombay was the most modernized financial powerhouse in India, that it was also becoming the most westernized. This was the home of the Bollywood, cinema, so many different factors. So he wanted to establish a temple which was had a mission. This temple is not an ordinary temple. This temple has a mission to stop the westernization or to preserve the Krishna consciousness of India, especially here in Bombay, and from Bombay the idea would help to preserve it all over India. Sometime Prabhupada would confide in us how his Guru Maharaj had ordered him to preach in the West, to bring Krishna consciousness around the world, to preach in English language. And he said that my Guru didn't specifically order me to preach in India. So whenever I preached in the West, I was very successful. So his idea was to build temple in Vrindavan and Mayapur for his Western devotees to come and visit the holy places. But then he said, how could he stand by and see India going to hell? Seeing how Indians were giving up their culture, following the West, and becoming degraded in various ways and losing Krishna consciousness. So he said it was his personal mission that he was preaching in India. So those...
He also said that Lord Washington in Los Angeles spoke to him and sent him to India, although it wasn't his plan. It's in the conversation. It wasn't his plan, it wasn't his Guru Maharaj's plan, but it was Lord Dwarka.
He said, Lord Dwarka, I don't know if you heard what Brahmananda Prabhu said. He said something I didn't even know about. It's that Lord Dwarkadish in Los Angeles, the deity personally spoke to Prabhupada and ordered him, although it wasn't his Guru Maharaj's plan, but Krishna himself spoke, that you have to go back to India and you have to organize the preaching there. Haribo!
Jai Anilo Premadana Koruna Prachu